Hello and welcome back to Equity, TechCrunch's flagship podcast about the business of startups. Today is Friday, September 20th. I'm Kirsten Korosek, and joining me today is TechCrunch senior editor Devin Coldaway. Devin, I thought about you this week because I see Amazon is pushing a return to office, which does affect you as a Seattleite. How are you feeling about this?
Well, it's not great. I live like 100 feet away from the Amazon area of the city, South Lake Union, and it's already, the traffic there has been bad ever since it was converted from like a industrial wasteland to Amazon land. But after the pandemic, there was like this blessed period of freedom when you could just drive through there. And then they had, 3 days out of the week return to office, and now they're trying to do full. I mean, the traffic in Seattle is already, everybody says this about every city, but like truly, especially in this particular area of Seattle, it's a nightmare every single day. And this is only going to make it worse. And nobody at Amazon wants it except for Andy Jassy. I don't know why. And the office managers, I guess, so they can order more snacks and take home the extra. That's my guess.
Those snacks, I mean, that is a reason to go into the office and to see people, in real life.
Yeah, people. I've heard about this.
Yes. All right. Well, you're the hermit, so I get it. Just a note, Rebecca Balan will be joining us later in the show. We're going to be talking about TuSimple and this interesting pivot. Also, she's at this summit that we're going to dig into today, and she'll give us her boots on the ground.
It's a weird summit. It sounds weird.
I'm intrigued. The rest of the show, we're going to talk about Luminate and Flink. So before we even get into deals of the week, did you read this really fun story about the Cohere co-founder, Nick Frost?
Yeah. And his band. Yeah, I think that's pretty cool.
So the backdrop is he's got this like company valued at $5.5 billion, this AI startup, but he's got this band and it's not like, oh, I play at the local fair band. Like he's like playing at Lollapalooza and they have a following. And it's just this really fun feature. Of course, then I proceeded to listen to all of his songs. Did you listen?
I listened to a couple. It's not really my thing, but I'm like, okay, this is some well-crafted pop rock stuff.
I'm always fascinated by founders who, first of all, it makes me feel like a little bit of an underachiever, quite frankly, because I'm like, oh, starts a successful company valued at, many billions of dollars, but also is talented in this whole other area that just doesn't seem like there's an overlap, like being a musician or, writes poetry or any of these other things that just really don't seem very tangential, and also be successful in that. So I don't know. Did it make you feel a little bit like an underachiever, Devin?
Oh, no, I have a superiority complex, so it's not a problem for me. But, I actually did meet him in Toronto at Collision. We talked about AI stuff. And in case you're wondering if he's like some AI true believer, big time, like AGI is going to save the world. No, he's a very realistic, smart guy. And we had a good conversation about how AI is just AI. Like everybody needs to chill.
Well, I'm going to say that maybe it's because of his multi-interest and music that helps keep him a little bit grounded. Also,
I agree. One
of the other deals I do actually want to talk about, though, is the story that you wrote. It's really cool. It's this company called Luminate, and they've created this hair-saving chemo helmet. Please tell me about this.
It sounds very sci-fi, but I covered them a couple years ago and they just raised a new round. Sometimes you cover a company and you're like, well, maybe that's the last I ever hear of them because their proposal is a little too crazy. But they make a helmet that people who are in chemotherapy treatment wear while they're actually having the treatment. And, the treatment is like toxic chemicals going through your system. And what happens is, the reason you lose your hair, some people lose their hair, is the toxins get into the cells that are your hair follicles and your hair falls out because it's poisoned. So what this helmet does is basically just, it sounds silly, but it basically just squeezes your head. It puts a little bit of pressure on your scalp so that the capillaries are closed. And that means the toxins don't get to your hair follicles. And it sounds simple, but it works. They just did their first clinical tests over in the UK, I think. 75% of people retained a full head of hair, and they're getting ready to do US trials with a couple dozen people over here and try and get FDA approval. And it's this is a life-changing thing for a lot of people. Chemotherapy is hard enough and cancer treatment is hard enough without totally losing how you look and all this kind of stuff. So it's not just I really would prefer to have my hair. It's really an important aspect of people's identity. And this can help people get through cancer treatment happier and more whole. So I mean, I
Yeah.
totally support it. And they got I think it's a $15 million to continue developing this and commercialize it. And they're working on a couple other things using the same principle, basically gloves and boots, because people get nerve damage, neuropathy, I think, in their extremities. And you can do the same thing. You just give it a little squeeze and it keeps the toxins from getting in there. I was like, isn't that basically what you just wear like a tight pair of gloves and like compression socks? And he was like, yeah, but those don't do it evenly and in like the exact right amount of pressure. So that's what we're working on.
That's really interesting. And you're right. They did raise like 15 million in a Series A led by Artist Ventures. And to me, what really struck me about this was the seeming simplicity, which clearly it's not, because it, as you mentioned, it has to be the right pressure and just that right cocktail, if you will, of pressure.
Yeah.
But also, I love these ideas where I'm like, why didn't anyone think of this before? And how long were they? Do you have any idea or sense of how long they were working on this and how they even came up with this idea or approach, I guess, in terms of using pressure, as opposed to what I think a lot of people would go to, which is, oh, let's put like another external lotion or something like that, that like goes directly to the hair follicle. Instead, this whole idea around pressure is just really intriguing to me.
It is. I think that they were, there's been a lot of studies on this. Obviously, you want to study all the side effects of treatment like chemotherapy, and it's different for everybody. But I think that the mechanism is well known. What was not known is whether you can block the capillaries and do this kind of pressure without damaging someone's head. I mean, you're putting on a giant mechanical helmet that's like puts pressure on your head. To be honest, I would be, unsure about taking that step myself. But they have shown that it is safe and that it is effective. From now on, like basically that could be a standard of treatment. And that's what they're hoping for, is that every place that does chemotherapy will say, hey, and your insurance will hopefully cover this helmet and you won't lose your hair, or at least there's an 80% chance. Like I love that. And I know that there was a lot of work before this, but this is the operationalizing of the scientific work, which I love to cover that kind of thing.
Yeah, because oftentimes when you're actually keen on this, you look at a lot of and have written a lot on like research, early tech. And it's so cool to be in the business of writing about tech long enough where the research paper becomes like a startup idea that it could actually happen. So it's neat to see this sort of come to fruition. The big question for me actually is going to be whether insurance covers it. But I know there's like many, many steps before we get to that point. But I'll be definitely tracking this company and see how their FDA approvals go.
Yeah. And even if the insurance doesn't cover it, like how much would you pay if you're going to be in chemotherapy for the next year or whatever? Would you pay $500 to keep your hair? Would you pay $1,000? Would you pay $10,000? I mean, not everybody has that kind of money to begin with, but a lot of people are willing to, before you get reimbursed, they're willing to pay for this kind of a life-changing or a life-preserving measure.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I see the business there.
Yeah.
Speaking of seeing the business, and this one is an interesting one because I see the business, but I wonder how successful they're going to be where they're doing the business. And the company I'm talking about is Flink. They're a quick commerce startup. They raised $150 million at a valuation of nearly $1 billion. And quick commerce is very popular, but not easy, and definitely not easy in certain parts of the world, specifically in Europe, where this company is focusing its attention. Where I see a lot of promise is in markets like India. So I don't know if you've looked at this at all, but to me, that was really striking and interesting that they were able to raise this much with a focus on this region.
I really couldn't say whether there is a market or not. I think it's pretty complicated. My intuition is that this market is kind of like the, scooter market, where you can't succeed as one of like 10 scooter companies in a city. But if you're the only scooter company in a city, you stand to make a lot of money. And if you can capture a market, then you can be profitable. But as long as you're competing and you have to price like you're competing and your prices are not reliable or, sustainable, then you can't make a profit. So I think that you hope that, you invest $150 million and then Flink becomes the go-to quick commerce solution for Berlin, Munich, going into other countries, whatever, big cities. and then it squeezes out the competition, and then you make money. So like it's a kind of a anti-competitive play in a way. Like you want to establish a kind of like micro monopoly.
And to that point, they are narrowing their focus. So I guess their plan is to double down on business in Germany and the Netherlands in partnership with Just Eat Takeaway. And it seems to be that they're following that strategy. Let's just like completely blanket these areas, become the only choice. Probably, and this is, speculative, just to be clear, probably not be profitable in these areas until they hit that scale to become. That's a little bit of a risky business proposition, although we see it all the time. And to your point, we absolutely saw it in the electric shared scooter business, and it did not work out well for a lot of those companies.
Well, yeah, I think about it like betting on horses. If you could make a bet at the last minute, rather than at the beginning, you've seen the horses race. A couple of them fell down, a couple have passed each other. And then now there's only like 2 or 3 horses out front. And you're like, all right, I'll go with that one, the brown one. It's a better chance than at the very beginning when there's 20 horses and you're like, oh, I don't know. I heard this one's pretty good. So now when there's already been a winnowing of the market, the obvious underachievers have been eaten up. So now there's only a couple options. They're coming down to it. You got to make your bet. Maybe you're making it based on merit. Maybe you're making it based on your friend is the CEO. I'm not saying that that's the case, but I bet it's happened. This is maybe the time to make that bet rather than the tumultuous time of the instant delivery market. It's been tumultuous since Cosmo.com. If anybody, any other elder millennials remember that
since the beginning. Yeah, I mean that's what to me stuck out is like that quote that in the tail end of a tumultuous time in the instant delivery market. Please let me know when that tumultuous time ends. I will note one other thing. They raised $115 million just a few months ago, like spring. It was rumored that they'd sell for $106 million to Getir. So that's kind of an interesting change. I would love to have known what happened between April and now to completely flip it. Nope, we're not going to get acquired. Instead, we're going to raise even more money and then, double down into these areas. So maybe that's the next story that we can push into and get the sort of behind the scenes story on that, how that went down.
I hope so. Yeah. Sometimes there is rhyme and reason to these about faces, but sometimes there isn't.
That is very true. Well, that is the perfect ending to the first half of the show. After the break, we are going to have Rebecca Balon come on. She's going to give us the boots on the ground take on this really interesting summit that she's at right now in New York City and talk about a wild pivot of self-driving trucks company TuSimple. Alrighty, we're back and Rebecca Balon has joined us. She's on a little bit of a field trip today. She's at this conference in New York called the Principled Business Summit. And the premise of this is reclaiming capitalism from cronyism and confusion. I'm a little confused. So Rebecca, what is going on at this conference?
A lot is going on at this conference. I think that I was intrigued by it because there's some things that align with my values. I'm like, okay, I don't like cronyism too, right? And it seems like the mix of people that are here are kind of on both sides of the aisle. It's an interesting mix of people here. And from what I'm seeing, most of the people that I've spoken to and that I'm listening to are really about this like general mission of improving capitalism, right? Like we are in a capitalist world, whether you like that or hate it, like that's the economic system we're living in. So how can we make it better, right? And so one of the ways that a lot of the VCs here are talking about is impact investing, right? So picking technology that's going to do the most good for the most amount of people. And that can span across industries, right? There's a lot of life sciences startups. I mean, there's like a plant-based sushi thing that we got to taste, which was interesting. And there's, people who focus on like sleep tech. And then, obviously climate tech, green tech, and then it expands out from there. And, it was surprising as well to have a talk that I was just watching and they were talking about DEI and how, there's a backlash against DEI at the moment. But really what DEI is about is just about finding great founders, no matter what their background is. And the applause in the room was like through the roof. So it was, I've been surprised by what I've found, is what I can say.
Well, I know Devin has thoughts because really in his heart, he's an anarchist. So he doesn't even like fall in any category. But...
Oh, yeah. I defy any categorization. No, I mean, this kind of thing, I don't mind people talking about improving capitalism. Obviously, we live in a capitalist society and there's practical improvements, reduce cronyism. Yeah, sure. But what I find is that it usually just means like, oh, wrong cronies. They're like, oh, we've been pursuing this incentive for 50 years. It's time to change that. And then you find out that it's just a different incentive with the same beneficiaries, usually the people who are already in power. You have to see the cracks in the system as they happen when you have income equality, and you have to say, like, what's failing systematically here? You can't just say capitalism and throw it away, because that's unrealistic. But you also have to say, well, maybe we should embrace capitalism, like peak capitalism, less. And that doesn't seem to be the discussion that's happening at a place like this. They're not saying, oh, well, let's increase regulation on certain private markets. Let's socialize this or that.
Right.
There's a lot of interesting solutions to market-based problems that are not, let the market handle it again, because that hasn't worked. And I don't think it's going to work.
I will say not everyone I spoke to is a free market capitalist, but some of the VCs I spoke to that I really enjoyed what they had to say when they were just talking about like their new investment thesis, I'm using quotation marks, because it's not really new. Really, they're saying we're going back to basics, old fashioned principles, right? Like looking at who would acquire this company before we invest. Someone described it to me as like reverse VC, like really doing due diligence. One of the people on stage, she made fun of all the e-scooter craze. She was like, I was never going to invest in that. It's insane, the valuations that these people got, because it's like nobody asked for e-scooters on the street, right? But what is the need that you're actually fulfilling, and go for that? Like, how can we fund and back things that will actually change people's lives and, make healthier humans? And I've had some great conversations. Let's just put it that way. Some very interesting conversations.
That's always good. Before we move on, I am curious because there are a lot of VCs there, it sounds like, and potentially startups. So is there a difference in their investment approach? That's what I'm really curious about, that would somehow eliminate this idea around cronyism. Like, is there a different funding thesis that gets us a different result?
Well, yeah. One of the venture capitalists was talking about patient capital, telling founders to look for investors who are happy to be patient and let you go back to the drawing board if you need more time, like focusing less on scale, and more on like, how are we getting this right? And how are we making sure that this has product market fit for as many people as possible? One of the people on stage said something about not investing for market share over profit. She doesn't invest in a company that's just trying to use that money to get market share. It's really just about like a sustainable growth model, which seems to be having a comeback in VC in general.
Interesting. Well, not speaking of sustainable growth models, this is a perfect pivot into the ultimate of pivots, which is another reason why we have you on here today. And that's to talk about TuSimple, a self-driving truck company, absolutely considered a darling at one point. And it's now not only shutting down operations in the US, that happened earlier this year, and sort of shifting its business over to China. It is changing to AI-generated animation and video gaming. Mm-hmm. Take us behind the scenes a little bit, Rebecca. They publicly disclose this now, but really the story that you worked on was about a fight, and I believe shareholders involved.
Yeah. So some shareholders had reached out to me actually before TuSimple announced its new business segment that has been, quote, unanimously approved by the board. And they had reached out a week or so before that happened and said that, hey, this has been something that we've been pulling together. They shared a letter with me that they'd share with the board. And the letter was saying, we're not really sure what's going on at TuSimple. You delisted from the stock market earlier this year. You have a ton of money and assets just kind of sitting there. And it looks like the company is trying to move those assets to China to fund a new business. Now, TuSimple's not been secretive about that. They've said we need this money to fund our autonomous vehicle business in China. But I think what has happened is a range of issues, including like multiple lawsuits, temporary restraining orders from courts, and a national security agreement with the US has made it, I think, probably difficult for them to pursue autonomous vehicles in China. And so they started pursuing another avenue, AI, gaming, and animation. Now, the problem that shareholders have is that they were not told about this, which, TuSimple posits, we don't need to tell you everything we're doing if we're just, trying something out. And not only that, but they accused the founder, Mo Chen, or co-founder, I should say, of self-dealing, because Mo Chen's really into AI, animation, and gaming. He has several companies, And a lot of the companies that are under his name or connected to him are also connected to his other companies like TuSimple and like Hydrogen, which is an autonomous ready hydrogen trucking company that he started around the same time that TuSimple went public. So there's like a lot of kind of incest between his companies. And yeah, it's been a little bit messy.
Yeah. So Devin, I have to ask you, you're like our AI guy, right?
That's what they tell me.
Is there any overlap, as far as you know, between the machine learning that is used to develop the self-driving software of a robotaxi or self-driving truck and, say, AI generated animation? Like any overlap?
There can be. I mean, I think this pivot is absolutely bonkers, but it's not that there's zero overlap. Like one of the huge parts of creating autonomous vehicles is simulations and making realistic 3D environments for agents, which are the drivers in this case, but could be pedestrians, dogs, trees, whatever, to interact with realistically. And you have to do physics simulation. You have to do light right, because if your environment isn't realistic, then the cars won't understand how to, what something looks like in real life. There's actually a fair amount of overlap in that sort of department. I would say, though, that AI animation, as what the people that I've talked to in the VFX and animation world, like I was just at SIGGRAPH in Denver, I think they would laugh at this because the animation world is getting so sophisticated, and the AI stuff is in generating animations from prompts and producing physically realistic stuff. There's a lot of core competencies that are not in the simulator and car side. There is some overlaps for sure. And I think that them switching to this, it's better than if you just started cold, because they have some expertise in various ways, but it's definitely still super weird. And I would not
super weird is definitely one. And like, here's the thing, like there are simulator companies out there already, and this has been a part of a self-driving world for a while. And I would assume, maybe incorrectly, that TuSimple had a robust simulation team already. And maybe that's the part that they're preserving. It just seems like that's not even what they're even pursuing. It's more video gaming and applying some of that skill set to that.
Yeah, I would say that one of the issues with even using kind of the tech that they had developed in the US is that because of their national security agreement, there's kind of like a silo on the data and technology that they're allowed to transfer to China. So it's like, what base of data and tech are you even using to do this? It seems like maybe starting from scratch, but kind of using the funds from the old business. And I should also add that TuSimple says that they are not giving up on autonomous driving. This is like a near-term profitability segment, and they are happy to license their tech and work with partners to fund the development of autonomous driving technology in China. So that's what they say. And I just thought I should say that too.
You know what that sounds like, though? Reading between the lines.
Yeah.
It sounds desperate.
Yeah, like we're losing so much money. We have to really quickly make a ton of money in this other super easy thing, which is AI animation, which nobody has made money on at all, let alone hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah, it does sound a little desperate. Very desperate, actually.
Right. And reflective, actually, of how hard it is in the AV space. I mean, it has been very much like a hype cycle type of industry. A few years ago, we were seeing companies, anything with autonomous vehicle, in their pitch deck or whatever, getting millions of dollars or being acquired for tens of or hundreds of millions of dollars. And there's been a ton of consolidation. There's really very few left standing. I mean, even just earlier this week, Motional, which is this Hyundai-backed company, their CEO and president stepped down, which doesn't seem like a big deal, except for the fact that this guy was really actually an early pioneer of the industry and really was a co-founder of what Motional is today. It just shows that it's pretty hard out there. So it doesn't surprise me that there is a pivot. What surprises me is their choice of pivot.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, they claim it's a $600 billion industry and it's just ripe for the picking. And They've got some decent partnerships already. They're doing like a 3-body problem, which Netflix just did a series on. I saw. And
what is $600 billion? Are they just talking about like the entire film and TV industry? I love those total addressable markets where they're like, oh,
I know they're just throwing it out there.
Oh, I know. TAMs make me laugh every single time.
Every single time.
Well, best of luck. Thank you for coming on and telling us all about this so I could have a little good chuckle. We'll see. Maybe we'll be proven wrong.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm going to go back out to the Lion's Den and keep interviewing people about why they're here and what they believe in.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.
Equity is produced by Teresa Loconsolo with editing by Kel. Bryce Durbin is our illustrator, and we'd like to give a big thanks to our audience development team and Henry Pickavett, who manages TechCrunch audio products. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.